You know how it is when you're digging through old family records and you find a name that just makes you go, huh? A person who just kind of pops up out of nowhere with no explanation? Well, that's exactly what we're getting into in this explainer. This is a real genealogical detective story, and it all kicks off with one single, super confusing name that ends up unlocking an incredible family history. So, you've definitely heard of Where's Waldo, right? Well, forget that. Our puzzle is more like Who's Leo? See, this isn't about spotting someone in a crazy crowded picture. Nope. This is about figuring out who this person even is in the first place. The question sounds simple enough, but believe me, the answer is a whole other story. All right, so our story kicks off where a lot of these family mysteries do, with a census record. We're zooming in on the family of Frank and Elizabeth Westerheide. They were German immigrants who settled down in Ohio. And, well, back in the year 1900, their household was hiding a puzzle, one that would have their families scratching their heads for literally generations to come. And here it is. This is the exact line that started this whole detective story. In the 1900 census, there's a 12-year-old boy, Leo Conan, living with Frank and Elizabeth. And his relation, it's listed right there. Grandson. Okay, simple enough, right? Wrong. Here's the kicker. None of their known kids, not a single one, had married someone with the last name Conan. So how on earth could this kid be their grandson? It just doesn't add up. So the first logical thing you do, right? You'd go backwards. You try to trace the family through the older census records to see what you can find. But boom, instant roadblock. It turns out that trying to find the Westerheide family was an absolute nightmare for researchers. And this right here, this is why it was so tough. You have to remember, census takers just wrote down what they thought they heard. And that led to some, let's just say, creative spellings. In 1860, Westerheide somehow becomes Sisterheiden. I mean, how? Then in 1870, it's Wister here. So forget about just typing the name into a search engine. That was totally useless. Researchers had to manually flip through every single page, which is, yeah, just as tedious as it sounds. But they did it. They found the family in the 1880 census. Yup, misspelled again, this time as Westerheide. And that's when a huge clue pops up. Guess who's living right next door? A family with the last name Cohen. That's the same name as our mystery boy Leo. Now, is that a coincidence? Probably not. We're going to put a pin in that for a second. Okay, but the biggest clue of all wasn't actually the neighbors. It was hiding in plain sight right back in that 1900 census record we started with. It's so easy to get laser focused on Leo, but if you look closer at Frank and Elizabeth's details, things start to get really weird. And these little contradictions, they're about to blow this whole case wide open. Okay, you gotta see this. The 1900 census says Frank and Elizabeth have been married for 22 years. Do the math, that means they got married around 1878. Okay, but hold on. If we jump back to that 1880 census, just 2 years after they supposedly got hitched, they already have a son named Gerhard, who is 22 years old. Wait, what? How can you be married for 2 years and have a 22-year-old kid? The math just does not work. It's literally impossible. And it gets even weirder. That same 1900 census asks Elizabeth how many children she's had. Her answer is 2. Just 2. But we know from all the earlier records that the Westerheide house was full of kids, at least 9 of them. At this point, you have to face it. The woman in the 1900 census simply cannot be the same woman from all those older records. So where's the answer to all these contradictions? Well, it wasn't in another government document. It was literally buried in the local cemetery. See, Frank Westerheide didn't have one wife named Elizabeth. He had 2 of them. And here's how the pieces snap together. The first Elizabeth, the mother of all those kids we saw on the early records, she passed away in 1871. Then, 7 years later, Frank gets remarried to another woman also named Elizabeth. She's the one we see in the 1900 census. And that explains everything. The later marriage date, why she says she only had 2 children, it all makes sense. And that means Leo has to be her grandson, not the first wife's. Okay, progress. We know Leo is related to Elizabeth number 2, but how? None of her kids seem to have any connection to the Conan name either. So, to finally crack this, we have to pull out a classic tool from the Genealogy Detectives Toolkit. It's all about looking at the people who are living right there beside our ancestors. It's called the FAN principle. That stands for friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. The whole idea is simple, really. Back then, people's lives were completely tangled up with the folks who lived nearby. So if you hit a wall in your own family tree, sometimes the best thing you can do is start researching their neighbors. You'd be amazed at what you can find. So let's put this into action. Remember back in 1880, the Conan family lived right next door? Okay, now let's jump to 1900. Just 4 houses down from the Westerhides, we find a family named Kolker. And guess who's living with them as a stepson? A boy named Leo Conan, born in 1888. And then, check this out. By 1910, that same Kolker family is living, you guessed it, right next door to the Westerhides. This isn't just a coincidence. It's a pattern. The next big break, the real aha moment, came from looking into Leo's twin sister, a girl named Frances. Researchers found her marriage record, and on it was the absolute jackpot: their parents' names. They were Ben Conan and Elizabeth Langenkamp. Now, remember that Conan family living next door back in 1880? That was them. That was Leo's family. Okay, so now we have Leo's parents. We are so close. The very last step is to find the link between his mom, Elizabeth Langenkamp, and his grandmother, our second Elizabeth Westerhide. And this is where it all finally comes together. So first things first, we look at the death certificate for Elizabeth number 2, and it tells us her maiden name, Holthouse. With that little piece of info, we can go searching for her first marriage, way before she ever met Frank Westerhide. And who did Elizabeth Holthouse marry, all the way back in 1853? A man named John Henry Langenkamp. Are you seeing it yet? And boom, there it is. That is the connection we've been hunting for this whole time. Leo's mother was Elizabeth Langenkamp. His grandmother, our second Mrs. Westerhide, her first husband was a Langenkamp. It means Leo's mother was Elizabeth's daughter from her very first marriage. Amazing! Okay, let's walk through it one last time just to make it crystal clear. Leo's mom was Elizabeth Langenkamp. Her mom was Elizabeth Holthouse. After Elizabeth Holthouse's first husband, Mr. Langenkamp, died, she remarried to Frank Westerhide. So that makes Elizabeth Westerhide Leo's actual maternal grandmother, and it makes Frank Westerhide his step-grandfather. And that, right there, is how you solve a family mystery that's been puzzling people for over 100 years. You know, this whole story just goes to show you that sometimes the most baffling family mysteries have a perfectly logical answer. You just have to know where to look. And sometimes you have to look at who they were living next to. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What kind of secrets are just waiting to be discovered in your own family story?